I'm Gavin and I'm from Compass, and I'm here today to interview Jon Cruddas, Compass's candidate for Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. Okay. So Jon, recently Compass members overwhelmingly endorsed you as Compass's candidate for Deputy Leader of the Labour Party in what was a fantastic result. So our members over the last few days have been emailing in their questions to the office, so we've got a number of questions for you.
Right.
So let's just sort of cut to the chase. Recently, Polly Toynbee, writing in The Guardian, said that democracy needs good, ordinary people to join political parties, decent citizens willing to tramp the pavements, knock on doors and rouse the inertia of the populace. If elected deputy leader, what will you do to ensure this is the case with the Labour Party?
Well, that's bang on, because the real debate here is between those who want to rebuild from the bottom up political parties, the Labour Party, and those who believe increasingly in a sort of virtual politics, which is not based on real people mobilising real campaigns in real communities, and they see the use of new technology as an end in itself to sort of precision bomb messages on a few thousand people who have real traction in the political process. It's a wretched model, but I wouldn't underestimate the amount of people who find that sort of seductive. So I think what we've got to do is contest that assumption and reintroduce the party as a vibrant, living, mobilising force in every part of the electoral landscape, and not just a few swing marginal constituencies. Now, I think we can do it. It's retrievable. The party has hollowed out. We've lost over 200,000 members. The activist base is in free fall, and we're losing more and more councillors. The spine of the party is in decline. But unless we act now, it might reach critical mass of decay. But I think it is retrievable if we address these issues over the next couple of months. Now, we can do it. I mean, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we had 220 people out in Sandwell. We had 46,000 newspapers we delivered in one day. We had, the whole trade union movement in the region coming together with local members and people who were sort of coming back into the movement because this was an anti-fascist, anti-BNP thing. But it demonstrates that this is not beyond our collective ability if we have the will to do it.
Okay, good, yeah. Despite having a decade of Labour in power, there is still a great degree of inequality across society, not least in constituencies like the one you represent. In fact, as you may know, last month's figures showed the first rise in poverty in nearly a decade. What measures do you think a new Labour government needs to take? And do you think, as Compass does, that the country is in the midst of a social recession?
I do. I think there's a sort of palpable sense that there's a sort of deep and sort of uneasy sort of insecurity that is quite pervasive across the country now. And we've got to deal with that, and we've got to start to understand it, because you cannot discount what the government's done over the sort of arc of 10 years. There's been sort of major sort of incremental, quite durable changes that we've introduced. But, we were brilliant in '97 in being the vehicle to articulate people's concerns and insecurities, and arguably we're not doing that now in terms of housing or in terms of an increasing sort of vulnerability around work and casualised employment, around access to good quality primary care. I mean, all of these things, we need to raise our game, built on what are the modern challenges, and not simply sort of rest easy with lecturing people about what a great record we have, because that won't do anymore, because there is a sort of acute sense that something is not quite right at the moment, and we've got to listen and be more sort of humble in terms of trying to address people's everyday material concerns.
Sure. Moving on. In 2001, you voted for the war in Iraq. If you'd known then what we know now, would you have still voted for the war?
No. And I don't question the motives of the people who took us in. But there were two basic elements to it. First was the premise, in terms of the imminent threat of the nuclear capacity that was in Iraq. Unquestionably, that was false. And second was the stated objective of building a liberal democracy, right? And just empirically, that's not happening. It looks like we're in descent. People like Colin Powell have described it as a sort of civil war now. He's better equipped to do it than I am. But the point being, if you just look at it in terms of the consequences of the action, then it has been disastrous. And we actually, as a first step to reconciling ourselves with the British people, we have to acknowledge the failures in this process.
Yeah. Okay, the elections in France, some have suggested, demonstrates that when you have two clear and differing visions of what a good society looks like, people are more engaged in the political process and far more likely to vote in elections, as perhaps their 86% turnout demonstrates. On the other hand, David Cameron recently suggested he'd prefer politics to be less partisan. What are your views on that?
Well, I must admit, I took some quite, I found it quite, I was quite enthused by the French experience. Not least because of it re-enfranchising people. 80-odd% turnout is good. And I think it was quite a corrective in terms of what we increasingly hear is the strategy here, where you've got an increasing interchangeability of the political parties. Someone said to me recently that the leaders are almost physiologically looking like each other now. And that's partly because they're all talking to the same people. And that politics is emptying out, it's just becoming this ruthless exercise in sort of precision bombing messages and polling a very small slice of the electoral landscape. And that is systematically emptying the body politics in terms of closing down debate, swerving around complexity and challenging issues. And it's a sort of, you know, I think it's a fairly wretched process that was underway. And somehow we need to sort of, you know, rewind some of that and contest some of the terms of debate. Because politics is not simply an abstract exercise in political positioning, it's much more important in terms of the substantive issues, especially for a Labour Party built on the sort of cornerstone of confronting inequality in poverty.
Okay, and sticking sort of to the French elections angle, can we learn anything from France in terms of the rise of the BNP here in the UK?
Well, I do think there's something palpable occurring underneath the body politic. And that's not just in East London, in my constituency, that's around and about. And I think it's interlinked to this increasing interchangeability of the political class, if you want, because they're all camped out in a very small part of the electoral landscape. And if you believe in a virtual politics, that it will create vacuums. And those vacuums will be filled. And I feel that they'll be filled by more extreme forces. And the other side of it is, you know, Labour, we agreed in 93-94 that we needed to build a wide and deep coalition with all elements represented within the Labour group. That's partly accounted for the Prescott-Blair head and heart strategy. And our coalition is fractured and splintered all over the place. And there's a palpable sense that people feel that the party isn't articulating their concerns. And the Labour Party was always at its best as a vehicle to articulate the concerns of working people. And we're not doing that at the moment, and that partly accounts for the movement away from us.
Can you fill John Prescott's shoes, or more to the point, do you want to?
Well, I think, look, in '93 the key was to build a coalition. We were very successful at doing it with Prescott and Blair, whilst on the one hand retaining our traditional support. We sort of camped out as well and allowed people who hadn't voted for us to vote for us. Now, we have to perform a similar exercise now. And our coalition is splintered and fractured all over the place. And it's a question of rebuilding a wide and deep coalition. The brilliant thing about the Labour Party, it always was a pluralism. It always had different classes, traditions, different regions and countries, different belief systems all together within a sort of federal architecture. And that's what we need to rebuild, because the danger is we see increasingly the party is just becoming a sort of vehicle to camp out on a very small part of the electoral landscape, and that won't do.
Okay, what do you think is your USP in standing for deputy leader? What can you offer that is unique to the other candidates?
Well, I think I probably want more change than the rest, actually. Yeah. I mean, I entered into it when I was approached, reluctantly at first, but eventually because it looked like this was just a carve-up within the government in terms of turf and positions. And really the deputy leadership debate was simply a stepping stone for those who wanted to be Deputy Prime Minister. And because, you know, Prescott, partly in the history of the whole New Labour thing, you collapsed the job of Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Deputy Prime Minister and a senior portfolio holder in the Cabinet into one job. The consequence of this was the Labour Party bit's fallen off the edge. So I just think the unique thing about me is I don't want actually a Cabinet, I don't want a portfolio, I don't want to be Deputy Prime Minister, I just want to be Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, and I'd abolish the chair of the Labour Party, which is a position that's imposed on the party from the Cabinet, and I'll turn that on its head and it become an elected representative role within the party.
Thank you very much, John.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.